Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
Hello, everyone. Today on the show, we have Michelle Moffitt Rogers. She is a licensed therapist and the author of Cracked Open. She specializes in helping individuals navigate anxiety and feeling stuck, identity struggles, and the impact of religious trauma. With a deep understanding of change management and narrative-focused therapy, Michelle guides clients towards self-trust, personal growth, and rediscovering their true selves. Her work integrates science-backed strategies with the power of storytelling, offering people a path to healing. She has written Cracked Open, a journey to a resilient and independent mindset, where she shares her expertise and personal journey of leaving a high-control system to inspire growth and self-trust and healing for people all around the world. Her passion for development shines through in every aspect of her work, making her a sought-after voice in personal and professional transformation. Beyond her professional life, Michelle is a mother to 5 remarkable adult humans and lives in the Pacific Northwest with her partner, and outside of work, you'll find her in coffee shops exploring cultures through food and travel and cheering on her favorite teams from the bleachers. Here's Michelle now. Oh, welcome, Michelle, to the show. You know, when we have guests on who are talking about these sorts of experiences, I think it helps so much for people to globalize, generalize this message of control and indoctrination and manipulation, and that you don't have to be in a known cult group to experience it. I think it really helps people be able to notice sometimes what they need to notice in the relationship that they're in. And there's so many things about what you touch on in your writing that I want to make sure to get to today. So please take a few moments and introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Michelle Moffitt. I am a therapist, a leadership coach. I've written a book called Cracked Open. I work in the religious trauma space. I have come out of a high control religious system with flying colors, but it wasn't flying to begin with. There was a lot of crawling in those spaces, and so my work is to help people understand those places that they've been in and how to get out and live a thriving life. There's more to come after you leave.
Oh, that's so good. I'm curious, actually, just to dovetail on that for a moment before we get more into your story. A lot of people feel really hopeless about the idea of leaving and what could happen to them or what no longer is going to be afforded to them. So what were the messages that you were given about leaving?
Yeah, that's a really big question. To begin with, I think the message I was believing in myself was that I wasn't going to survive. I think innately we look for belonging. And so I had belonged to this system for 30 years. And leaving meant I was leaving everything that was comfortable, familiar, my friends, a community I had developed and I had been a part of in big ways. And so in my being, I felt like I wouldn't survive if I didn't belong. And, we can follow that trail of like, if I don't belong to this community, nobody will like me. They'll spread bad news about me. I'm gonna lose my job. And if I lose my job, I can't provide for myself or my children. And then we will all be abandoned and we're going to die. And so I think that's kind of the innate message I got just because of our need to belong somewhere. I had been told that I could no longer worship at my church because I wouldn't repent. And, so I was cast out. And again, like I lose all the privileges that affords in a system. I lose the friendships. I lose the meal train. I lose the community that is there, kind of in a safety space for you. there's also in the system I was a part of, it's very much about an us versus them. So all of a sudden I'm a them. And so I lose the usness and I'm becoming them, which is the enemy or the bad people on the outside. And I was determined that I was not going to be a them. I was a good person. And it was this constant fight within myself of how are they doing this? Why are they doing this to me? I'm keeping my values. I'm keeping my faith. I'm keeping my all these things about myself. But it's so dysregulating when your authority figures or people who have assumed authority over you, and I let them, are telling me that I'm no longer welcome
Wow.
in this space.
Wow. Okay. So I know we're hitting the ground running here because I heard what you said about leaving, and I thought, you know what? People are given a whole set of fears about that. And they're the same in the emotion, but the wording and the specifics are sometimes different, but the message is the same. And also that idea of the them. I think that's why so many cult groups or controlling groups have all these words for them that are really awful, awful terms and put downs, and from being evil to being somehow subhuman or whatever the group believes in. And then you also touched on community and how devastating it is to lose all that you have had and all that you know. But I think also how devastating it is to find out that these connections are conditional. All right, so we'll come back to all of that. So I would love for you just to talk about getting involved in, because it's multi-layered, getting involved in that community, a relationship within it, and what that was like to have this be multi-layered. So
Sure.
go for it.
Yeah. I call it a triple patriarchy. So I was married to a narcissist. So there was a very patriarchal system happening in our home. Any final decision was not left up to me. My husband needed to make final decisions. I wasn't allowed to lead. Or if I was leading, I had to make it look like he was, right? So that he took on the male headship or authority. We see this Christian nationalism kind of thing coming across there. And then the system we were a part of was also a patriarchy. And so it was very male driven. Women couldn't lead in the system. Like I wasn't allowed to vote for decisions in the system, in the denomination that I was a part of. I wasn't allowed to preach. I wasn't allowed to, I think it was more of my husband, but I wasn't allowed to talk to other men. So if a man had a question for me, I would be standing next to my husband and my husband would answer it on my behalf. And I think that a lot of that had to do with his jealousy more than more than the patriarchal part. And then, the triple patriarchy, the third part of it was our greater community, our greater culture here is also a patriarchy. And Rachel, I think the funny part about this, if there's anything funny, is I was so indoctrinated in the system. This was my bunker that I lived in, that I thought patriarchy only referred to Abraham and the Jewish fathers. I didn't know that it was a universal term that people were throwing around in 2018. It was just a religious term, I thought. And so, even coming to terms with that part.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Right. Being outside the sphere of social interaction, the norms, culture, then yeah, you don't know about words that you're using and right how they're viewed by the rest of the world. And it is interesting. It's disorienting, to be sure. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So triple whammy.
triple
Hmm.
whammy. Yeah.
My
And
goodness.
and I, you had asked about how I ended up in this space. Grew up really supported, loving, kind parents, very progressive in the Pacific Northwest. And I had a couple of traumas happen during college. And so, again, that place of belonging and really, I think every freshman goes to college looking for belonging. We need belonging for our survival. And I ended up transferring after my freshman year. And the second week of my sophomore year, so I transferred and then I'm looking for belonging again. I found it at one school and I'm transferring and finding it again, which was really dysregulating. And then the second week I was at this new school, I was date raped. Somebody put a roofie in a drink. And my body and my brain were telling me to look for safety. And for whatever reason, I took a really hard right turn and landed right in the conservative fundamental church because they promised certainty and they promised rules. And I felt safe in these confines of rules. If you can tell me how to show up and stay safe, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And so I ended up in the system and ended up marrying a pastor within the system. And that's the rest. The rest is history at that point.
Uh-huh. Interesting you mentioned the word certainty, and it makes perfect sense too from what you've been through and the changes and being traumatized, having something happen to you without you being able to have the power to stop it. That is quite a horrible violation and can make anyone nervous about moving through the world without protection. And so sometimes when people have dealt with trauma, they do find they have this emotional pendulum swing that goes far to some other place that offers them what they felt like they are suddenly missing. And certainty is something that a lot of people talk about when they are getting involved in something that has absolute answers, absolute protection. Even though they don't, but they say they do. It's reminding me of an advertisement out here for a company called California Psychics. And their tagline is, have the joy of certainty.
I've heard that, yeah. And I was like, totally
right?
taken back. I was like, okay, you don't have the market on that.
Right. And so isn't that interesting? But they know what words to use. And I'm sure they used an advertising firm that sort of did this deep dive into what people are looking for and what they feel like they need, and that this is what you promise them.
Yeah, I'm sure they had a psychologist on board in their advertising.
I'm sure, right? Because it was really, unfortunately, very clever and was going to speak to a lot of people. And I think give them this real false sense of security and false sense of knowing. So to add to all this, you were married to a pastor. So that ups the ante here, right? Because you're with someone who needs to come across a certain way, may or may not have been drawn to that position because of their own needs. I'm not saying everyone who's, clergy has that, but people who have positions of authority, who make big proclamations, sermons, speeches. Sometimes they're enamored with themselves, sometimes more than the general population. Again, I'm not saying something across the board, but statistically speaking, there's also the need to be a good pastor's wife and what that means and what that's supposed to look like. And so tell me what that meant in the church to be a pastor's wife.
In our particular denomination, like I said, the women can't preach. You're not ordained. That's not allowable. So women are not going to seminary and going through the process of ordination. If you want leadership it's called complementarianism is the term. The belief is that God created men and women equal, but gives them different roles. And so the role of a man is to be the leader, the headship, again, in that term, and the woman is submissive to the man. I wasn't raised like this. It isn't something that my parents taught. My dad was a big feminist, and my mom had lots of roles that she got to lead all kinds of people, men, women, children. And so as a pastor's wife, we were also church planting, which meant we were starting a church. So it's like a startup business of sorts. We had to go through an assessment period. And so it was a week-long assessment in a hotel. We had people watching us the entire time. There were maybe 8 couples with us doing the same thing. And we were graded on how we sold, how we came across, how we started conversations. And so I'm going through this assessment. I'm getting graded. I don't get an opportunity to stand up and do a sermon. I'm going to a women's session where they're telling you to make sure you are having sex with your husband so that his eyes won't wander. And but I'm getting assessed too. And so if I don't pass the assessment, then we don't get to go plant a church. But I don't get a paycheck, and I don't get a title, and I don't get something on my resume for the time I spent helping get this startup off the ground. And so as it rolls out, then it's, I need to make sure I sit in the second row. I wouldn't sit in the first row. I was just a little rebellious. Sit in the second row of church. I have 5 kids, and so it was this wall of our family, making sure the kids are behaving. Everybody's watching us all the time. Our money is coming from tithes, from people giving on Sundays. And so if I happen to run into somebody at Starbucks or Target, they got free judgment over what was in my hand or in my shopping cart because it was coming from tithes. And so there was just so much wrapped up in it. For us, it was particularly noble to not make any money. And so to also live kind of on the poverty line, so there's no assets coming out of it or anything. And, so having to figure out how I was going to make our money stretch. I call my shopping days my hunting and gathering days, where I'd go to 3 different grocery stores getting the best deals. Our home was always open to anybody who wanted to come. People were free to use our home for their own parties, for the church. And my attitude was supposed to be one of, I'm so happy these people got to use this home, and I had the opportunity to allow them in this space for the glory of God, right? And, and my kids are all disappearing. We would have dinners where we were selling the church to people, and my children were, prompted with how to ask questions, and then they would have to go on their own and maybe watch the kids from the people that were at our dinner party for free. So it was just it was our whole family was involved in this endeavor. And, back to your point with the kind of pathology of pastors, in graduate school, we were doing psychopathology, a course on that. And the instructor said, a lot of pastors fall into this pathology of narcissism, right? Because you have a stage and you can create the service how you want it to be. You get to pick everything, and all the eyes are on you. So it's interesting in that sense. So I think in the bigger terms of everything that happened, I really lost myself. I was supposed to show up a certain way, and I was going to do it the best that I could. And, I was zealous about what I was believing. And so I was going to be the best pastor's wife and best mom of my kids and best thing to the church that I
Right.
could
Okay. No
possibly be.
pressure.
No pressure.
So I'm sure, yeah, no one would crumble under that. Okay, so many interesting points. First, the idea of living at the poverty level or above it is noble, and so that's one of these things that often just applies to the followers, not to the leadership or the people who really are at the upper echelon, who are often doing a lot better. But then that's when the argument breaks down, because then are they not noble? No, that doesn't seem to apply to them. There's so much about already what is the woman's responsibility, where you don't have any of the power, but you do have to take all the responsibility. Like if your husband has a wandering eye, that's because you didn't, whatever, fill in the blank, look, I don't know, enticing enough, or make sure that you worked on yourself. I don't know when you would with 5 kids, but still, oh, sure, you have plenty of time to do. No, you don't. Or even brush your hair, right? Just happy I remember to brush my teeth. So then it really is interesting to have it be where, and this happens a lot within religious groups, where if the man strays or does something that he shouldn't do, the woman is immediately looked at as the culprit, and which gives her a lot of power, but then really not any power, just the power to be blamed, which is a horrible place to be. I think also with this idea of this kind of being equals, but you each then get your roles, and the other one who is equal to you is the leader, the one who makes all the decisions. So then you're not equal, but it sounds good to say. It's reminding me that I want you certainly to be able to tell more of your story, but I'm reminded of these videos that I sometimes see on, I don't know if it's TikTok, Instagram. There's a man who is a scholar of language, and he knows how to translate a lot of biblical texts into the original language. And so he has said some things, and I've talked to some of my clients about it, and I think maybe even on the podcast. He was saying the whole idea of a woman being created from the rib of a man is a mistranslation, that the word is side, not rib. And so they were created side by side. That did not work for a religion. So it was like she's from a little piece of a man's side, but no, they were created side by side. And this other thing that doesn't have to do with what we were talking about, but I just want to throw it in. The idea that Mary was a virgin, also mistranslation, and that the word was just that she's a young woman. But it then was, that it was mistranslated that she was a virgin. So that became the way people were supposed to be. And then that could lead to the whole Immaculate Conception story, which is all very interesting when you get down to real translations. So that's my little 2 or 3 cents on that.
I mean, just another sense. We'll add a third sense.
Yeah, great. Cool.
Is the teaching that men actually have one less rib. That's a teaching within the fundamentalist church. And so my children actually thought for a really long time, maybe up until 10 years ago, that men had one less rib than women because one was taken out.
Oh my goodness. Okay. That is really interesting.
Because it's very, everything is translated to suit people, and then it's very literal, right? We believe in the literal translation of the Bible, right? And
incredible. Wow.
So, according to somebody's translation.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So how interesting. So I'm now understanding a little bit more about in your writing when you were saying that you were trapped in a system that protected your abuser. Let's talk about the abuse and what you endured and how that was handled within the system.
From the get-go, when I took a hard right turn, the message that you would receive is find somebody who loves Jesus like you do and marry them. And you get married quickly because you're supposed to be a virgin, so you can have sex. Basically, you want to have sex as soon as possible when you're 20. And so you're just looking for somebody who says they believe the same thing you do, and you quickly get married, and you don't have any idea that your algorithms match or not, or that you have anything in common. But Jesus is supposed to cover it all, and he will fix anything for you. And so very quickly, my husband culturally was from a different part of the US, and we had a lot of different ideas about life. And I grew up in the city and he didn't. I grew up going to museums and he didn't. He liked country music and I didn't. And there was a lot of differences in us, but we were sold out for this whole purpose. And very early on in our marriage, 2 weeks in, he told me he'd been lying about a lot of things, and a divorce was not an option. I didn't know what to do with this information. He lied about how fast he ran the 40, grades he got in school, just all kinds of stuff. And I thought, I said, I do. I just have to figure this out. And so end up fast forwarding of like, okay, I just need to be a better wife. I need to be more attentive. It's all on me to make this marriage work. But there was always this gaslighting and defensiveness and lying. And we moved every 2 or 3 years for the first 15 years of our marriage, which is also pathology for narcissism. Something happens and you've got to get on the move again. And I'm never quite sure what was happening, whether it was money or women or something was going on. And he was getting found out. And so it was time to pick up and move and start over again. And so the abuse emotionally, financially, sexually, and as, we're leaders in this system, I don't know who I'm supposed to talk to about this. And again, when you're talking about I'm at fault is what the system believes. So I just need to try harder, and so there's nowhere to go. I remember sitting with other pastors' wives and them saying, oh, I feel like we're back at that place where we're just being roommates again. And we need to work on our relationship and, get close again. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I have no idea even where to start. I don't even know how to explain what's going on in my house with my husband. And if I said anything, would he lose his job? And then what? What happens if he loses his job? And I didn't want to be responsible for that part either. So, as it unwinds and he's getting sicker and sicker, really, more manipulative, more deceiving, more abuse. He was stalking me, those kinds of things. I ended up getting a lock on the bedroom door and I wouldn't sleep with him anymore. because I was scared at night. We had a gun safe, and I had both sets of keys because I was scared and didn't know what would happen. And things started coming out. People started noticing, and so the leaders in the church. There was 8 churches in this denomination in the area, and they said, I'm obligated to tell them what's going on. And again, the word obligation, and they're my authority is what they said. Because I would ask, why do I need to tell you? But I was seeking help also. It was just a really difficult situation. My husband was sick. He needed mental health care. And I didn't know how to share that. And I didn't want him to lose his job because then our family would suffer. And I didn't want to be responsible. But of course, as the woman I am. So it was just this convoluted way. So I'm obligated to share with these people, these men that I've known for 10 years and been in community with, what's been going on in my marriage. So I write a 3-page document, share it with them. I look up expecting help, and they said, "We don't believe you. You need to repent." And so that started the journey forward.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So I'm just curious, and I want to come back to that moment because that sounds devastating. Did they ever believe you at any point? Did they ever see it? Were they ever willing to look?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was one person in particular who did and refused to say anything. And that, I think, is even one of the more devastating parts of you knew and you were kind of assigned to help me, and you didn't. You didn't speak up, landing me and my children in tons of emotional trauma, religious trauma spaces. So and I think there's an inkling of people knowing, but they're protecting the system.
Right, right. They are. And it's interesting because I've talked about this before, and I talk about this a lot with clients, but this idea of moral injury, that there are people who may have heard your story, may have seen it, may have wanted to do something, but knew they couldn't. And they'd be putting themselves or their families at risk if they were to say something or get involved or see it differently than the elders, I guess. And those people, sometimes after they leave, are so depressed because of their own sense of moral failing. I mean, everyone is set up, I think, to behave in a way that's outside their conscience in these systems. There's such unhealthy systems all around. But here, okay, so you write this 3-page document. I'm sure it could have been 30 pages, right? But you had to sort of do the shorter version, but make it heavy hitting. Like, I need to get this point across. They then didn't believe you because they just couldn't believe a woman, or because it would kind of upset the apple cart, that for them to really see it. What do you think it was about?
I think both of those. I also think that I had done a really good job in making everything look like it was fine. There was a couple of times in there that he took personal leaves of absences, and they never asked what they were for, but it was for him to get stabilized. And I still, it's February and there's up to our armpits in snow in New England, and I'm shoveling the sidewalks and making it all happen and getting the kids to and from school, and and he's not home. And so, but they, it's a personal leave of absence. Okay, we'll sign off on that. But I think one of the things I discovered in writing my book was this thing called impression management systems. And it's the place of, there's an audience watching a stage, and they want to make sure that the stage looks great. But what's going on behind the stage is a totally different picture. And, they had a system to protect. When I moved and got out of the system, I met with a woman pastor, which was, unheard of. And I think at the base of who I am is I have a real hard time. I'm overly optimistic. And I have a really hard time believing that people are mean or could do bad things. And I keep coming back to that again and again. I'm like, Michelle, when are you going to learn this? Come on. But I just couldn't understand why these men that I had been friends with, and we'd vacationed together and we'd had holidays together, I couldn't understand why they wouldn't help me. And this pastor that I met with, this woman pastor, she said, it's a system, Michelle. They're protecting the system. And I was just floored because I was, I wanted help, and my husband needed help, and I didn't want this to be ruined, and I didn't want to end up divorced or broken, have a broken family. And I was just like, this I needed this help, and they refused to give it to me. In fact, they were the ones who, increased the harm.
Right. And they increase the harm by not intervening, by not getting him the help that he needed, by not being willing to really look at it. I'm wondering also, because I don't know this level of specificity, but when people do things, whether it's because of mental illness or not, but when they do things that put someone else in harm's way, and then they know that there's no consequence for that, and they get the message, which happens in our world, which happens sometimes in our government, which happens all over the place. You create more of this sense of entitlement. Sometimes it increases the danger that another person is in living with that person. And did that happen too? Do you feel that with your husband that his behavior got worse when he realized he could do whatever he wanted?
I think so. One of the things I kept saying is, if you can just admit what you've done, there's something to work on here. Multiple people would say, Michelle, he's not going to admit it. It's just not going to happen. I couldn't come to terms with this. How could you not admit this to keep your wife and your children together? Why would you not come forward with this information that you've done all these really horrible things in order to work on this? But, and again, I don't operate in that mindset. I'm what you see is what you get. It's there's not there's not hiding here. And so that was really difficult to understand. And I think it did become this place of like, well, I don't have to own this. Right. And so, time after time, there was moments where I was literally afraid for my life. I was followed by white surveillance vans. I remember going into the house, and I asked him to not be in the house, and he followed me around, and he was a big man. And I felt like any moment here, he's going to push me down the stairs, or any moment here, something bad is going to happen. And you just also, you just don't want to admit that. You don't want to sit in a space where you're thinking, my life is in danger. Been with this person for so long. And honestly, I think one of the most terrifying parts coming out of all this was I lived with this person for 25 years and I have no idea who they are. There's so many masks and all of that coming up.
Right. How interesting. And I feel like in these environments, people don't really know who you are. You haven't had a chance to really show yourself and your strengths, your ability to speak up, what you want, what you think. I guess there's a lot of hiding. There was an interesting thing with this term, and it's funny you mention it, impression management. I wrote that down because I wanted to. I love the term. It just is perfect. So it was suddenly reminding me of this relationship. Sometimes I hearken back to, which sometimes our work is because of our
Our
experiences,
experiences.
right, in our life. That I was with someone who had narcissistic personality disorder, always needed to look like the good guy. And when you don't have the same personality, you don't notice what's happening for a long time because it would never occur to you. And so sometimes when people, let's say they leave a sociopath and they say, I just feel like such a fool that I didn't know what they were up to. I think, no. Take that as a compliment. That your brain is wired so differently that it would never occur to you, right? That's a good thing. But then it becomes good to know what to watch out for. And I remember it was years down the road in this relationship that if we got invited to something, if we could go, if we could RSVP, yes, he would make the call.
I know exactly.
Oh, you knew, right?
Yeah.
I guess predictable, right? If you know the personality. So then I was the one who had to call if we couldn't make it. And then one time I was homesick and I think he forgot that I was there. And I heard him make us a follow-up call. Hey, I heard that Rachel called you and, we can't come. I would have loved to have gone, but, she just she's not very social. And I don't know if she feels really comfortable with you guys. And so it's really a shame because I would love to spend time with you, but feel like I have to go against her and she has all these emotional needs. And so I got to hear that not only was I the bad guy, but then there was this follow-up call to defame me. And I thought, never would I assume that anyone would be doing this. And I think if someone says, hey, can you let so-and-so know we can't make it? It's just because they don't have the time to make the call. There wouldn't be anything
Right.
other than that, right?
Right. But there's so much backstory and so much manipulation around how
Right.
to spin this, right?
Right. Exactly.
I
It's
think at one
amazing.
time, towards the end, I was like, "Okay, what is actually going on in this brain over here?" I need to kind of figure this out, and it was like, okay, so, like, wanting to have attention and wanting the accolades and wanting those things, and I said, "So, when you empty the dishwasher, are you doing that just because it needs to be emptied, or are you doing it so you get noticed and get the accolades for it?" And he, like, said, so I get noticed and get the accolades." And I was like, "Oh." And then he realized what he said.
Uh-huh.
So that was
Whoops.
the wrong answer,
Uh-huh.
you know? But
Yes. Right. I mean, it was the right answer, but it was he exposed himself.
right, he
Yes.
exposed
Right.
himself. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
just multiple things like that. I was like, "Okay, I need to figure this out." And so when you actually burn my clothes with the iron, are you trying to get out of ironing? And so right? Yeah, I am. And you're like, "Okay, what is going on?" Right? What is how are we, you know? Or just the you hear so much of the deflection or the parroting. I remember one time I was like, "You have used me, you have abused me, and you have propped yourself up on me." And his answer back was, "I'm sorry I used you. I'm sorry I abused you. I'm sorry I propped myself up on you." And I was like, "That sounds right, but that's not feeling like an apology."
Right. Right. Well, there are all these talks about, an apology is meaningless if it doesn't lead to changed behavior. You can say all the right things, but I don't know if he was planning on not doing any of those things that he apologized for.
But it's also like you're not aware of what you did. I have to tell you what you did. Like,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. I think also the idea of being stalked. Here you were carefully monitored and watched just by being in this system and being a woman in the system and being a pastor's wife in the system. But then he stalked you on top of it or had you followed. And what was that about? Was that just his paranoia or control?
yeah, I would say paranoia. There was, stuff was on my tracking on my phone. Even if I got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, he would like wake up and follow me as if I don't know what I don't have any idea what I would be doing in the middle of the night. So there was a lot of that space, very jealous of my kids, of our kids. We have these kids together. And, if I had to take one of the kids to a basketball tournament that I did one weekend, but came home for the evening, very jealous of like, you're neglecting me. You're not giving me the attention I deserve. And I'm like, I'm taking care of our child, right? And neglect is like a kind of a child word. I'm not neglecting you. So, just a lot of jealousy, a lot of paranoia, a lot of thinking. The light started coming on for me before that meeting with those men. I was at a spa with my sister celebrating her 50th birthday for a week. And he is thinking that my sister is covering for me, that I am there with somebody else, a lover. And so we're taking pictures together with my sister. My sister and I are doing aerial yoga and hiking in the ice. And he's thinking she's covering this affair that I'm having, which is ludicrous to me. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of work that we're trying to do. And my sister's in it too, right? So just a lot of paranoia, delusion.
Right. And so here you were doing so much. I'm sure just to be able to go away for the week, it took a lot of everything to
Well, and
make
yeah,
sure.
I think in those moments, I can't remember a time that I let my kids stay home with him if I was going on a retreat or, the kids would always get farmed out to other families. Something in me knew that he wasn't safe.
Okay. Right. And so I'm wondering, just moving forward, when you were able to leave and knowing also with 5 kids, you need to think about the impact on them and also what they might have been feeling or noticing by that point. So I'm just curious about what drove you to finally leave and your kids' experiences of all this.
Yeah. I think that the harder part was, again, going back to the piece of, I don't understand why he's not getting help. I don't understand why he won't admit what he's done. because if I'm told I have to repent, which basically said you need to sit down and shut up and figure out how to make this work. And at that point, I was done. I'm done with the church. But even when you're part of a high controlled religious system, it's almost like you have to go through court with them, with the system to get out of the system. They weren't going to transfer my membership to another church unless they approved of it. And, at which time my good friends that were on the outside, that were some of them, they said, well, you took vows to this high control system. And that rattled around in me a lot of like, I did take vows. I said I would obey them. And they're like, but you want to get out of the system, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, so in that place of like, you're going to court with the church, basically saying, I need to get out of this, and they get to decide. So that part was really hard. And the belief system that we had, my kids also had. And so being able to try to connect with my kids and tell them what was actually going on was really difficult, because it was not allowed to get divorce wasn't an option in the church. And then also hearing, I'm not supposed to throw my partner under the bus, but how do you not throw them under the bus when they have a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder? And so it was really hard and confusing. At that point, I had 3 kids in college. So 2 were left in the house, and trying to figure out how to keep them safe was problematic and hard. And so anyway, it just was a lot of strategy and a lot of help I had from relatives and a few friends that were outside the church that really, got me rethinking and come up with a strategy, like I said.
I bet, knowing that you had 3 kids who were already off, well, I'm sure you missed them. It still probably felt nice that they were going to be somewhere safer. And so it's a difficult thing emotionally, and needing to put your needs last, but by choice, I think, because you want to really take care of the kids and what they need, and that the system's not going to do it with you and for you. And no.
I mean, I asked multiple people, I'm like, could you please call my kids? Could you please check in on them? This is really hard on them. And big goose egg on that one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So then there are a lot of people who will say, at some point, yes, I knew I was done. I just needed to figure out how to take the steps to really finalize things. And that can take some time. And it's really nice to hear that you had people on the outside who you could connect with. That sometimes is the lifeline. And so, how long do you think of process was it for you, sort of when you first started, like when you were told to repent, because that would seal the deal for a lot of people, until you were finally able to leave? What was the span of time? It's usually quite a while.
I think in the in-between part there was, my husband was fired. And, he came to me and said, God finds great delight in me being the pastor of this church. And I said, what if I don't want to be the pastor's wife? Because those two go hand in hand. And he said, is this an ultimatum? And I said, no, but it's worth a discussion. And so I don't know if he was fired because I refused to be the pastor's wife anymore, or what it was. And so he didn't have a job for 6 months. And in that time, our housing was owned, kind of caught up in the church. Our two kids that were still at home went to private Christian schools, which gave us a scholarship based on him being a pastor. And so they were going to need to transfer schools because we couldn't afford that anymore. And so at that point, I was like, I really want to go home. I want to go back to the Pacific Northwest and start over. And I still think I had great hopes of, if we can move, if we can get out of this system, there might be a way forward for us. And so we moved, and quickly after we moved, I realized this was not what I wanted. And the hardest part about all of that is I alone needed to make the decision. I could have help from all these people on the outside and support, but deciding to say, I'm going to get a divorce, that's on me. And our marriage was over a long time before that. But, I'm having to be the one that, he'll forever say, she divorced me. Well, you abused me, and the marriage was over, and, all those things. But I think that was the harder part. And it does take time. It takes strategy. I fortunately had help on the outside from family and friends financially, and with, their brilliance, lawyers, and, all the things. And so it made it possible. It wasn't easy,
Mm-mm.
so.
No, no. And there's so much that's happened since then. So you left, you found your way. You found your way to do something that speaks to you. It's very hard to do that. I don't know if people realize how hard it is to leave a system where you've been taught so many things about yourself and you don't know what is accurate and what isn't. And do you feel capable? Are you going to get spiritually punished for what you're doing, etc.? Also, the idea of being watched and that feeling doesn't go away for a long time, sometimes not ever. So there was a lot that you were up against. So I'm wondering about the first bit of time after you left, what it was like for you.
Honestly, I don't have a ton of memory from that time period. I think I was just kind of lit up the whole time, hyper vigilant. Those words, "we don't believe you," rang around in my head. I was thinking this system could discredit me. They could take my work away. They would take my kids away. I didn't know what they were capable of doing, but I had believed that they were super powerful. And so, like, I just kept quiet and made myself small and put one foot in front of the other and checked things off on my to-do list of getting the kids enrolled in schools and, getting the power bill set up and whatever it was. And I think as time went on, I became less and less hypervigilant. That was the huge piece of like, I just thought they were everywhere. I thought they're watching me, they're going to hurt me, they're going to do something that takes away my livelihood and I can't survive, which was a bunch of baloney, but that's what I was believing. And because, the whole system is fear based. And they also have this God card and God's displeased with you. And I was like, I don't know if I make my own decisions or if I choose that this isn't what I want to do or don't go to church, is God displeased with me? Right? You just keep going through this thing and it just takes so much rewiring, right, to get out of this indoctrination. I would call it I was gut washed. I learned to not trust my intuition.
Right. And so I'm wondering, of course, how you get that back. But before we get into your life now and how you've gotten there, was there anything else that you wanted to make sure to mention about your experiences leading up to this?
For the listeners to trust themselves, to know, and to reach out. I think that was the hardest thing, to even know where to go. How do I get help? I don't feel like there's a lot of resources out there still, especially in these systems. And it's really, really hard, not just logistically to get out because you're having to start your life over, but also your body and your brain tell you that you need to belong. And so you're literally stepping off the plank. And those are really hard things. And I still feel like I have friends that are still part of the system that maybe don't want to believe how hard it is or how wrong it is, or they're complicit, I feel like,
Mhm,
you know.
mhm.
So
Right. Right. Yeah. It's very hard because it can feel like a betrayal, when you see this idea that maybe people are being complicit. So I'm wondering then, here you are outside needing to learn to trust your instincts, trust your feelings, your view of things, feeling maybe even deserving of happiness. I think also being able to feel like you're a smart person and capable as a woman in the world. And so I'm wondering, these are the things that a lot of the listeners are listening for. Just they're in that space and they want to know if it's possible to ever feel capable.
it is 100% possible. I walked a lot, and there's a lot of research around walking and the crossbody movement that you do that's kind of like EMDR. I remember I would walk around the high school that was by my house, the blocks around the high school, and I can remember different spots on my walks of where, I suddenly had a new realization of I can actually be happy. Like, I get to move forward in my life. I get to do this however I want now. Right? But, I think coming from a system of certainty, the mystery or the openness in that space, it can be terrifying as well. So there's a way you're supposed to show up, and now you're having to undo all of that and then go, "Actually, I don't have all the answers, and actually, I don't know what the next step is or what's for dinner," or right? And that is in itself the dissonance, that discomfort you feel in your body when you're challenging your beliefs is so strong, and going, "It's gonna be okay. I take the next step forward, and I can try something, and if I don't like it, I can try something else." There's not just one right way to show up in the world. So I think those things were really hard. And I still feel like I deal with some of that today of going, okay, wait, that's not the right way.
Right. Right. So something that comes up a lot with my clients is this idea that they're still shell shocked from not having been able to make a mistake. Most things were deemed a mistake. If it was your own idea, or if something didn't work out, it was because you didn't wait to get permission or because it wasn't the church leader's idea for you to follow and you were going outside of their philosophy or theology. And come to find out for a lot of people that the world itself outside is way more forgiving, right? Like, okay, so you made a mistake. Okay, you know, right? And just to know that, to believe that, you don't believe it at first because why would you? And you've learned to keep yourself in check, keep yourself in line for survival. I mean, you've needed to learn that because you were being watched and rebuked and it. And so just messing up, whatever that means, the idea that if you win, you win, and if you lose, you learn. Like, it's not really losing, you know?
When you win,
Um,
if you lose, you learn. That's beautiful. Yeah.
and so how did you do that? How did you take those risks to make a quote unquote mistake and deal with those moments?
I would I would tell myself, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to go do this thing and I'm going to see if I get smoked. That's what I
Uh-huh.
would tell myself. Did I get smoked? Okay, I'm good. I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Uh-huh.
what I would tell myself. And, I just kept trying things. And I think that one of the words I came across for repentance, um, the Greek translation of repentance is um, to change directions, which I think is a fair definition. Like you're going the wrong way, and your whole body, your mind, your heart, and your gut need to turn and go a new direction. But the church uses it as you're a big sinner, and now you need to notice what you're doing, but you're still a big sinner. You're just always a big sinner, right? And the Hebrew translation of it means to go inward, to go inside. And it's very neutral. And it just is like, okay, so you got off track a little bit. Go back to your true self, go back to your intuition, go back to that part of you that's your moral compass. And I think learning that in those places was really like, okay, let me just pause here. I'm a good person. I'm not going to hurt anybody. I've got a good moral compass. Like, let me choose something different this time and see what happens. See if it aligns with who I am. And if it doesn't, then I can try something else next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just much more kind.
Right. Much more kind. And I think about how you're able to keep your blood pressure kind of nice and even, right? Like even just the way you say it, it's relaxed, like your shoulders are relaxed. Like, but that takes some time. So here you were, and then you ended up going to school, getting degrees. What was that process like? Because just going to school, being able to ask questions, being seen for someone has a capable mind, just what was that all like for you?
Yeah. So actually, I think I did that in my 40s and I was still married and a part of the church. And in our bubble of our world, we needed some good therapists that were clinically trained and biblically informed. So I went to seminary and added the biblical part to that and became a counselor for these churches. And so they would send them to me because they trusted me. And I think honestly, that was a part of the undoing as well, because I became a little more independent and it was offsetting. But interestingly, the seminary I went to wasn't just our denomination, it was a broader theology. And I was really dysregulated going, okay, these people are smart and they're not in my denomination. Like I thought we were the right one, and to kind of expand that a little bit was uncomfortable, but really good. And interestingly, too, as a therapist in this organization or the system, I was asking people just recently, so would you go ask your pastor for a recommendation of a therapist? Like people that are more liberal, maybe progressive. And they were like, why would I ever ask my pastor for the name of a therapist? I'm just going to I'm just going to find somebody who's good and clinically trained.
Uh-huh. Right.
And I was like, oh, wow, that is another way of that control. Like everything stays within the system. You're going to hire a Christian plumber and you're going to hire a Christian this and a that. And so it was really interesting to kind of think, oh yeah, that also I would never have thought of that, but everything was in the bubble.
Yeah, there are people I know who say they've left certain very controlling denominations, gone to ones that afford them the chance to be themselves and to a greater degree. But they still do that. They'll still ask the clergy person for a recommendation or advice about their next moves. And while a clergy person might have some insight, they're also not trained in a lot of things. And I mean, they don't know sometimes which therapist you need to see. They have their resource list, but we don't know why certain people are on that list and how they got there.
Yeah, it was so interesting. I'm speaking at a women's retreat for a church, and it's a progressive church. So I went to the priest and I said, "Hey, don't you want to meet with me about the retreat?" And he was like, "Okay." Right? And it's like, "Well, aren't you concerned that I'm going to teach something heretical? Like you're the shepherd of the sheep. Aren't you concerned that I'm going to teach something that might not align with your doctrine?" And he was like, "Not really." And he said, "And if you do, I think the women there are smart enough to figure it out." And I just was like, like,
Right.
"Oh, right. Right. They don't need to be spoon-fed. They'll figure it out for themselves."
Right. Oh, that's such a fascinating interaction because, yes, they don't need to be spoon fed. This person had trust in what you were going to be doing, what the women were going to be able to synthesize. But also, it feels to me like you had learned, as a lot of people have, to be worried about an emotional reaction or anger or cutting you down for what you did or blaming you or seeing you as someone who is up to something because you dealt with not being believed, but also dealt with people in positions of authority who I think couldn't manage their emotions. Here, there was this person who seems healthy.
Mhm.
Okay, doesn't
Yeah,
really.
that's so interesting. I didn't like adding that to the picture. I'm like, yeah, they know how to deal with their emotions, and I wasn't fearful of that.
Yeah, yeah, because I think so much of what we do in religious environments and others, sometimes in workplace environments, is we think that we're being psychologically minded and cautious to be respectful. Um, but sometimes it really is fed by, I think this is going to set this person off, or they're going to publicly shame me, or I might get fired. I'm going to hear about it. They'll never forgive me. All the things that come from a narcissist, that come from people who haven't really kind of grown up in a lot of emotional ways. And so to not have to deal with that is very freeing.
Yeah, I mean, when you're describing that, it's all here, like all of that
All
anxiety and
in your
fear.
chest. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And a lot of people have had to deal with those personalities. A lot of women, to a great degree, have had to deal with those personalities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so here you were. So I'm curious about you being in school and then becoming someone who people were referred to. Was this before or after you were told that you weren't going to be believed and you needed to repent? What was the timeline on that?
Yeah, this was before, it was all kind of caught up in that same time period. But again, I felt like because their response to me, there was like, I just went quiet, to some degree because I wasn't gonna fight them. I felt like my job was on the line also. This was how I was making money, and I was needing to provide for my family. So that it was scary, and yeah, so the timeline was school, and then kind of the tail end of school was this all was starting to hit the fan.
Okay, because I just think about the conflicted messaging that is very confusing for people. Like, on the one hand, you're a trusted resource, and the other hand, you're not believed. And so, who are you to them, and how are you being seen? And I guess it depends what the subject matter is. Yeah. So I'm wondering, about your work and, of course, about your book and what that was like for you, but just also some of the issues that you see coming up with clients, with therapy clients, with coaching clients, and what you see are kind of themes that keep coming up that you've needed to address with your clients in your work.
Yeah, primarily, I think it goes to identity. I love doing narrative therapy, narrative focused trauma therapy. And because, we have this origin story and we don't get to choose that part, but we do make choices along the way. And how can we look at our stories differently that they can become our resources for ourselves? How can we use imagination, something better for ourselves? And how do we get there? I use the Enneagram in a lot of my work because I feel like it gives words to our experience. It's, about motivation, not behavior. So that's really helpful. But I work with a lot of women kind of second half of life where they are understanding like, hey, how do I want to do this next half? What do I really want it to look like? And who am I in this space? And so I'm finding that a lot for them. I do a good bit of couples work. And so it's really understanding, hey, you're different. And that's not a bad thing. It's okay to have your own beliefs, but how do we communicate? How do we deal with our conflict? A lot of the themes that we've talked about, like, let's try something. And if it's just kind, we don't have to have it figured out.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things.
Right. I'm wondering also with those different kinds of themes, which ones have you found are kind of the most sticky, like they just stick around for such a long time that to the point where people wonder if they're ever going to get better in that realm?
Trauma is a hard one. I think primarily because we get very protective of it and our ego gets really big in front of the trauma because, it's been said that reliving your trauma is almost worse than the original trauma itself. And so we just want to protect what happened because we don't want to revisit it. And so getting the ego to kind of step away so we can touch it and kind of retell the story over and over and over so it becomes boring or separate the emotions from the story, I think is a lot of it. I think what we start believing is if I separate the emotions from my story, it didn't really happen. Because we are complex. Our emotions were part of the story. But if we can learn to just have a story that was true, but we can learn to identify the emotions and then move into action in a different way than protection. Those emotions, then I feel like more healing happens in those spaces. But trauma is a really hard one. I've been really interested. I'm not a psychedelic practitioner, but I'm very interested in what's going on in that world because I feel like it's what I've been reading is it allows the ego to step aside so the trauma can actually get touched and healed.
Yeah, there have been some new modalities that people have tried, and it is really good to be open to different things as long as you're doing it in a safe way with people who have training. There are a lot of people who will come to me after having followed some person who might just call themselves a shaman and they find themselves in a jungle somewhere taking something and they just haven't done their due diligence to see if there's any training and if there's any kind of safety net there.
Right. Yeah. And I would 100% agree with that, do your due diligence and make sure you're actually seeing a practitioner that is trained and supervised and educated in what they're doing.
Right. So, okay, so trauma. What else have you found has been something that really lasts a long time, maybe longer than people would like after these experiences?
Anxiety.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And speaking from experience, because you're just, again, that hypervigilance of what if, what's next, what's around the corner. And, for myself, I find meditation's been really helpful. I need to get more into that, but it actually has been really helpful to just still my mind. Because when you're in this hypervigilance, when you're hypervigilant about your environment, you're hypervigilant about how you're showing up. Am I sinning all the time? It's really hard to let that go and to still your mind. And so it's a busy mind, and I think a lot of people feel that. And even with, some SSRIs, I don't feel like the busy mind settles down. I think it just is, you might feel calmer in the space, but the mind keeps going. And so I find that's a really sticky one as well. How do you slow that down a
Right.
little bit?
Interesting. And have you found this that people feel like, okay, I'm on an even keel, I'm doing really well, and then something happens. There's a memory or a life event, and then they're needing some support around that and finding what they still need to maybe still work through.
Yeah, and I think we can normalize that for people, that triggers are gonna happen in your life, and, when they do, go get the help you need and walk through it, but if it's gonna happen, you need to be prepared for when it's gonna happen. You will get triggered. Something will happen. It's just life, and again, being kind to yourself about that. Go get the help you need. I'm thinking on your question too, I think one of the sticky points is, and this is a huge another topic, but with a lot of people I deal with is around the purity culture and just what do I do with sexuality? And can I even talk about it, right?
Right. Yeah. If you can describe to people, I know there have been some other guests who have talked about purity. I just don't know if everyone listening today knows what that is. So if you can describe that and talk a little more about it, that would be great, actually.
Yeah. So a lot of religious systems and a lot of systems, period, have views around sexuality. In our particular denomination, it was you needed to be abstinent until you were married. Masturbation was off the table, or if you want to call it self pleasure, and everything was very binary. So it was all she and him and her, and no thems and theys, and also, and so but the church also very much dictated around sexuality, and so you would be asked questions about your abstinence or about your past, and you would be judged if you'd had a sexual encounter. And for me specifically, I was raped. And so I'm like, okay, does that count? And will I be forgiven by God? And am I broken forever because I've had this situation happen to me? It's created so much trauma within people around sexuality. It's caused a lot of physiological problems. A lot of, people have pain with intercourse because of what's going on psychologically for them because of this hard and fast rule around what sex is. So the church dictates what your personal life looks like, basically, and gets to have a free go at you with it.
Right. It's like it's interesting when you have the time away and then you can see things because you have the vantage point and you're not as triggered and you're not as flooded. I've heard people say, with purity culture, with being kept in control, being made to feel like you are someone who can't be trusted and you need all these rules around you, that there became this irony. It was a guest was talking about this a couple of years ago, actually, about how this man in her household who was not physically appropriate with her was the one who was measuring her skirts and measuring to make sure her collarbone wasn't showing and the length of her hair. And so all of that mattered, but what he was doing to her didn't. Like there was no place to go with that. And it helped her have a sense of what the priorities were in her particular church. That was one of those things that really caused her to say, I'm out. As soon as I can, I'm gonna be out, you know?
Yeah. When you're out of it and you look back in, you're like, why is that the card that gets played? I mean, why is it anybody's business? Because I'm standing up for this God, or tell everybody how they're supposed to I don't know, it doesn't make any sense.
Right. And that's another interesting point. The idea that once you leave something, it's hard to describe it because it doesn't make sense, but it feels like it does when you're there.
Yes, yes.
And what is that? What's that about?
Yeah, I'm reading Crazy for God right now. It's, Frank Schaeffer's book. His parents were part of the starts of the fundamental movement, but he's not in that anymore. And so it's his memoir, and I'm so relating to his mom in the book because if I can sum it up, it's there's these 3 boxes that you filter everything through. It's very simple. Here's the 3 simple ways you show up in the world, and I'm filtering all this other information through it, and I'm trying to make sense of all this outside information through my 3 boxes of filter. And then it comes out and it spits itself out in some weird way, weird. And you're like, when you're in it, you're like, of course, that's how it's supposed to be. And then outside, you're like, what the heck? Well, that doesn't make any sense. And I don't know how to describe it any other way except you just figure out your brain is wired in these very simplistic ways of thinking. And all this complex information comes in and you spit it out simply, and it doesn't make any
Mhm.
sense.
Right? Right? But yeah, I think there's a lot of social psychology there that other people seem to think it makes sense. So then you kind of make it make sense and you don't question it. And you might also just be reiterating what you've heard and not even thinking, even at the time, if it makes sense or not. You just know, like you're in a play, like, what's my line? Oh, that's my line. I need
Well,
to
and
say
I
that.
think, I think to the kids that are in Sunday school and their Sunday school lessons are all on apologetics, right? And so it's how do I answer somebody's questions? And you just memorize everything. And it might not make any sense. Like men don't have an extra rib, right? Like, but it just gets passed down.
Right?
We're just
Yeah.
gonna believe it because somebody told us to believe it. Somebody wrote this book and we're gonna believe what's in the book.
Yeah. Right.
They're
Right.
the expert, right? You know?
Uh huh. Yeah. Right, and I think it protects us from cognitive dissonance and other things that might make us uncomfortable and being seen as an outsider or a heretic or all the other things. So many words.
Blasphemer.
Right, blasphemer. Oh, yes. That's my goal, to be a
Yeah,
blasphemer.
yeah,
Yes. Okay, so before we finish up, I want people to know where to find you and find your book.
sure, yeah. You can buy my book on Amazon, independent bookstores carry it. You can ask for it at your library, and then you can find me on LinkedIn. My handle is Michelle Moffitt Coach, same handle on Instagram. MichelleMoffitt.com is my website. So would be happy to hear from you and connect.
That's lovely. It was so nice to talk to you, to get to know you, and it was a pleasure, and thank you for sharing about your life and about your insights and speaking personally and also professionally. It was really wonderful. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much to Michelle Moffitt for the episode today. It is so powerful to hear someone like Michelle telling her story. There are so many very, very powerful points that she made. One of the points was about leaving and being made to feel like once you leave, you're not going to survive. Once you leave the community, you're not part of the community anymore. You're part of quote unquote them always being the enemy because so many of these cults have this black and white, us versus them mentality. But so many people I talk to are so much happier once they leave the group. They're so much happier once they're able to break free, once they're able to really be themselves, once they're able to really get their life going or started for the first time. It is a very powerful thing for a lot of people. It's also important to mention her point about being trapped in a system that protected the abuser. A system that protects its abusers is a system that is never going to be safe. It is a system also that's never going to be set up to teach lessons to its members, to its next generations, for how to treat people and what's right. It's a system that is sort of rotten to the core, where perpetrators get away with things, and it just creates more perpetrators or perpetrators who do more terrible things because they know they can. We sometimes see this in certain governmental systems. Sometimes we see this in places we really don't want to see it. We see it sometimes within the military. We sometimes see it on college campuses. We sometimes see it within family systems. And one of the things that makes you trapped in this system is that there's nobody to talk to and no one there to protect you. And there's usually so much secrecy from the outside world. So people really don't know what's going on. You really are at the mercy of the people there. Something that Michelle spoke about also was this idea of impression management. I love that phrase. It's such a good one. It's something that happens in big business. It's something that happens also within government. A lot of people shaking hands, looking very sharp, and smiling, seeming like they're very important, seeming like they have it all together. But you have no idea who these people really are behind closed doors, behind the scenes. The people I trust the most in the world are the people who are the same on the outside as they are on the inside, the people who are going to behave the same way no matter if someone is watching or not. And within cultic systems, impression management is used to create and maintain a positive image of the leader and of the group, often through deception and through manipulation. Sometimes when people are love-bombed when they first get involved, they think these people really love me and this is my new community and this is my new world and I'm going to have a much happier time here than in the world outside. It's a way of isolating people, though, from the outside, and it's a way of distorting information to control people's perceptions from the start. The cult leader might also project an image of authority and wisdom to gain influence, while at the same time suppressing any questioning of their leadership, any disagreement. There is so much deception and manipulation of information that is part of this impression management. They'll fabricate stories to control the perception of reality among the followers. They will lie by omission, lie by commission. They'll minimize people's concerns. They'll minimize people's pain within the group. But they will often exaggerate or completely fabricate all the horrible things that happen to people who leave the group. And of course, that's going to make people feel all too scared of leaving. It's very important also to a cult leader that you project a positive image. So many people I work with say they had an outer self that was for show, that was performative, that wasn't authentic, but that they always had that inner voice, that inner part of them. And now that they are out of the cult, they don't know if they should merge the two or if they should try to get rid of the one that was masking how they really felt inside. It's very disorienting. It's also so important to a cult leader that the narrative to the public is controlled so that only the positive aspects of the cult are highlighted. People who seem to have it all together are the ones who do the recruiting. And there is so much that happens within cults that people don't know about, sometimes until they get to the upper echelons within a cult. And sometimes then people will really see things from behind the scenes. I've noticed that when people go up to leadership positions, there is less impression management. But I think they might not have to try so hard at that level because they think, well, you must be really in, so we don't have to hide as much from you. It is so important for Michelle to be talking about these things because it helps us understand what people go through when they're in these systems. It helps us understand how much there is within these systems that should be safe, that should be spiritual, that should be holy, that turn out to be highly destructive and highly selfish. Because if a leader cares more about their reputation than they care about how they treat you, that is the height of selfishness. Thank you again to Michelle for coming on the show and sharing her story. Take care, everyone. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @IndoctrinationPodcast. And for Twitter, find us at _indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.